caught one more time up on Cypress Avenue. Caught one more time up on Cypress Avenue. And I'm conquered in a car seat. Not a thing that I can do. I mean, hello, everybody, and welcome to That Album, our weekly choice of our album that has meant something to us over the years. As you all know, this show started when I was chatting with a colleague about music one evening, and we thought we should take this online, and we have done. And now we have guest hosts, and I'm delighted to welcome Helen today. And I must say that this is a funny one for me. So many years ago, my first ever job was in a hi-fi shop, and the manager of the shop was somebody who was very much like me. We were very, very alike. And as you can imagine, that was a truly hideous experience, like looking in a mirror. So all of the things about me that wind me up, he exhibited all of the time. And one of his favorite artists was Van Morrison. So as a result of that, I hated Van Morrison. Everything that Van Morrison did and every song I heard, I hated. So when you, Helen, said, "Oh, I'd like to do Van Morrison," my heart sank. I can honestly tell you, I just thought, "Oh my God, no, not anyone but him." But I tried to enter this with an open mind, and I was interested in this album because there were none of the songs that I knew, and I started to play it, and I can honestly say this has been a joyous week. I have absolutely loved it. What a fantastic album! What a fantastic man! It's been brilliant. So what can I say? Thank you.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. And hello, everybody. Yeah, it's a particular album. Actually, starting off, what album number is this now? You mentioned, is it 68?
This is album number 68. Yes.
Yeah. So now think about that. 1968.
Of course.
Ah,
Yes. Yes.
wow. There's a nice little. Yeah, I'll actually read out just a little piece to put things in context, and it actually comes from one of the Irish newspapers. So it says Astral Weeks was commercial flop when it came out in November 1968. There were no singles released from the Astral Weeks album. Most critics panned it. Nick Logan, who went on to become editor of NME in the 1970s, dismissed it in his review of the influential music magazine, maintaining it was inferior to Jose Feliciano's album, Feliciano, which was released the same year. It was a slow burn. It took until 2001 before the album went gold, selling more than 500,000 copies. But the cultural impact of Astral Weeks, however, has been huge. It is in the conversation of one of the greatest albums of all time. It was the favorite album of comedian Bill Hicks. Bruce Springsteen was obsessed with it, as Stephen Van Zandt, guitarist with Springsteen's E Street Band, remarked. Astral Weeks was like a religion to us.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, but at the background of it, and this is something I'll refer to as well, is there is this wonderful book called Astral Weeks, A Secret History of 1968 by a journalist and musician called Ryan H. Walsh. And one of the things that the commentaries on it is that Astral Weeks is many things, a deeply reported illumination of the Boston, underground of the late 60s, an investigation of a mysterious cult leader, and the skeleton key to the canonical album by Van Morrison. But at its heart, it's a journalist's quest to understand the very air that was breathed in a single moment in time, a personal reading with poetry of history, and a yearning to trace the invisible byways of inspiration itself. So,
Yeah,
and
a heavy album. Well, it's interesting because it's not an album that I had ever heard of, and I know that there'll be many people for whom this is kind of like a religious experience. And it was really interesting because I was reading some stuff about this as well. So yeah, a commercial flop, no singles, critically panned a lot of times to begin with, but as you said, a slow burn. So Astral Weeks appeared in the all-time albums polls worldwide, and according to Acclaimed Music, is the 15th most ranked record in critics' all-time lists. In 1978, it was voted the fourth best album of all time in Paul Gambaccini's poll of 50 prominent American and English rock albums. It was also ranked second greatest by Mojo in 1995 and third by The Times in 2003. It was ranked at number 19 by Rolling Stone on the list of 500 greatest albums of all time, maintaining that rating in a 2012 revision and dropping to number 60 in the 2020 version of that. In 1998, it was voted the ninth greatest album of all time in Music of the Millennium poll conducted by HMV, Channel 4 and The Guardian. It placed number 6 in the list of 100 greatest British albums ever. Time included Astral Weeks in its 2006 list of the all-time greatest 100 albums. When Astral Weeks was voted the best Irish album of all time in 2009, Niall Stokes wrote for Hot Press, "It's an extraordinary work packed with marvellously evocative songs that are rooted in Belfast, but which deliver a powerful and lasting universal poetic resonance," which I think is really interesting words. The album was also included in the book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. It ranked at number 16 in the 2003 edition of Colin Larkin's all-time top 1,000 albums. And I thought this was a nice little throwaway. Martin Scorsese said that the first 15 minutes of his 1976 film Taxi Driver was based on this album.
Yes.
It's like, oh my God. So this has been so pivotal. And I couldn't, when I was I was reading stuff, and I decided that I would make some notes about this, and I couldn't find this, but somebody had said to Van Morrison, and I think we discussed this earlier in the week, someone had said to Van Morrison, this is the most important single record in rock music. To which Van Morrison just went, "Oh no, it isn't." Yeah. Which I thought was really lovely that he's so self kind of deprecating about it.
Yeah.
But
although he could be, in terms of rock and roll, R&B, it's the genres. It covers quite a few, and yet all of the various various reviews and so forth, all somehow plump for rock and roll or plump for R&B. But in fact, if I actually just read out again the genres that have been listed out, it's singer-songwriter, chamber folk, blue-eyed soul, Celtic folk, and chamber jazz. Now, how about that for a range of?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that might open some discussions around, and yet the all-time rock.
Yeah. He really interesting that this album doesn't contain any of his big hits, and looking at some of the stuff that he's written. Although I say I hate Van Morrison, well, prior to this album, obviously there's Moondance, there's Brown Eyed Girl, there's Into the Music, there's Have I Told You Lately, there's The Bright Side of the Road, there's Days Like This. So there's like all of these like mega successful songs that you kind of like. He is notoriously grumpy.
He is, yes.
A really interesting little vignette was his father had one of the largest record collections in Northern Ireland at the time.
Correct.
And he grew up listening to some of my favourite artists. So Ray Charles, Solomon Burke, Muddy Waters, and Leadbelly.
Leadbelly was the key one.
And really interesting that in the song Astral Weeks, he references talking to Huddy Leadbeater, showing the pictures on the wall. And I just think it's so lovely how all these things kind of loop together. So first song on the album, Astral Weeks. Have you got any interesting insights into this one?
Well, to say, I mean, just listen to the words, as I say. If I ventured in the slipstream between the viaducts of your dreams, where the mobile steel rims crack and the ditch and the back road stop, could you find me? Would you kiss my eyes and lay me down in silence, easy to be born again? I mean, there's just...
Yeah, it is proper poetry, isn't it?
It is.
Proper poetry.
Absolutely. What it does say, though, is according to Eric Haig, it shows Morrison had once and for all pulled neck and neck with Dylan as a lyricist. Now, even mentioning Dylan and going back to previous years, there was a folk festival,
the Newport Folk Festival.
Yeah, and that was quite a notorious one at the time, but he says that it's one of these songs where you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think I can elaborate on it any more than that, other than to just listen.
Yeah, so I thought the poetic lyrics really, really interesting, and the way they're written reminds me quite a lot of two artists that we have previously covered on the show of that period. So Joni Mitchell and David Crosby.
Yeah,
you know, the same sort of stream of consciousness way of delivering the stuff, but such a beauty to the choice of words. But as you say, let's just have a listen. Astral Weeks.
If I ventured in the slipstream between the viaducts of your dream, where mobile steel rims crack and the ditch and the back road stop, could you find me? Would you kiss my eyes, lay me down, silence easy to be born again, to be born again. From the far side of the ocean, if I put the wheels in motion, yeah, I stand with my arm behind me.
Yeah, I found lots of the tracks on this. It's very strongly a 60s feel to it.
Sure.
I think is really, really charming. You know, it's not overproduced. It's kind of quite sparse. It reminds me quite a bit of the David Crosby and the Joni Mitchell, but also Eric Angle and artists like that. And I just love the fact that it oozes musicianship. You know, and maybe it's a bit of the jazz vibe, but you kind of get that feel that these are just a bunch of people that are hanging out, having fun.
That's right, because with Van Morrison himself, I mean, I believe in one interview, he was said, well, you know, you're a singer, and he said, no, I'm a musician, and that's very much what he is. But somebody said there about being notoriously grumpy. I have to say, I actually did witness a little bit of it on stage, as it were. I first came across this album really when I was in college. So you're going back to 1978, 79 was when I first, as I said, got wind or hearing of it, and it was something that was very central to student population. But the National Stadium was the first place I saw it. It's actually a boxing stadium, a very small one, in fact, which is not that far down the road from where I live. And that was the first time I got to hear Van Morrison. So it was that kind of very, very, if you can imagine a stadium, national stadium, if you like, boxing ring type, you can see how the audience is placed around.
Yeah, kind of right on top of
absolutely, yeah. But that was the first gig. But the indications are that he doesn't, or he certainly on Astral Weeks, it's stated to say that he basically didn't interact with the musicians that were brought together. That he kind of, in a sense, stayed in one room, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And you said there earlier about the just sitting in and jamming and saying, letting the actual music itself, letting the chords pick up with each of the musicians. I mean, if you look at, let me see, the range of musicians that came together. I'm just looking at it here. But anyway, no, I don't want to hold this up, as it were, but Brown-Eyed Girl.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I saw that the musicians were his backing musicians were playing with some of the biggest names in music at the time.
Yeah,
and I kind of quite obviously they're so comfortable in themselves doing this. And I think what's really interesting is that the remastered version of this that came out 2008 or whenever it was has got some additional tracks on it, and the additional tracks are often other takes of the first tracks on this, just different versions. So one of them is I won't bother to look it up now, but one of them is like Astral Weeks itself, and there's a much longer version and there's a much shorter version of Madame George.
Yes.
But iconic. Yeah, but as we move on to the second song, Beside You, really interesting, and this is the big difference between artists of this period and people today, is that this song, Beside You, was recorded in the first session of the Astral Weeks recording, and it was recorded on the same night as Astral Weeks, Cypress Avenue, and Madame George. So they did 4 songs in a single day in the recording studio, and clearly multiple versions of these songs. And Astral Weeks and this were both done in one take. It's like this.
The whole album was 2 or 3 days in the making, and I think the budget was somewhere like $200,000. But it was just. It was that intimate, if you like, and it was, I think, probably a sign of the ways in which music was being produced.
So I mean, I love the next track, Beside You. I love the fact that this is a duet between the guitar and the voice.
Yes,
I mean, it's just it has that intimacy to it that I really love.
It's described basically as the kind of song that you'd sing to a kid or somebody that you love. It's basically a love song. It's just a song about being spiritually beside somebody. That's simple.
So here we go, Beside You.
Little chap is gone away out on the back street, out of the window to the falling rain. Right on time, right on time. That's why I broke an arrow with his finger down the road so dark and narrow in the evening. Just before the Sunday's 6 bell chime, 6 bells chime. You know the doctor barking, way down the demonstrated highway where you wander.
See, it was that voice that used to really grate on me, and it doesn't anymore. It did, which is a remarkable shift. And maybe it's that I'm more mature now and can appreciate what a great musician he was, which I hate saying, because
he was very young. He was very young and very raw, I think one of the words that was used.
Yeah, but that's that. I now see that as being part of the charm.
Yeah,
You know, it's very natural, and
yes,
you know, I love the fact that some of these songs, so Cypress Avenue and Madame George, apparently he wrote them on the fly.
Yeah.
So you know, he picked up his guitar and he strummed along and he sang, and it kind of just went. That was it. It was the song written as it came out, which I think is just utterly flabbergasting, because you know there are very few people that are able to do that.
Yeah. Just one LinkedIn user says it's a jazz record, of course, but they were picked up by jazz musicians. And if I just actually have a piece from a site called Classic Albums Sundays, it says basically that the recording of the album was quite spontaneous and not meticulously planned like so many other classic albums of the era, as this was the beginning of the multi-tracking and studio effects.
Mm.
They had also booked a few predominantly jazz-based musicians for the session. They were unknown to Morrison and included, and this one is a key one, is Richard Davis, downbeat musician of the year, the modern jazz quartet drummer Connie Kay, and the guitarist Jay Berliner, a Charles Mingus collaborator who had played on the classic album The Black Saint. And the somewhat remote and as in Morrison, remained somewhat remote and didn't provide a guide sheet or any direction as to what he wanted. Davis recalled that he didn't even introduce himself and seemed very shy, or rather grumpy, I don't know. But anyway, the band more or less jammed, and the result was unlike anything else in the current pop rock sphere. And its blend of classical guitar and jazz melded with Morrison's own impressionistic free-form poetry. It's very well put in terms of capturing that background.
Yeah, so apparently, Peter, the problem is that you're not allowing your comments to be shared onto other platforms, and that's why you're coming up as LinkedIn user. That's in the security settings on LinkedIn. Hello, incidentally. Hello, Peter and Andrew and Jim and Eric and Ian and John and everyone else. So track 3, Sweet Thing. This really reminded me of Pentangle. You know, the way that the instruments are recorded, the separation between the instruments, the like uber talented musicians spread across the stage. I thought this was wonderful. He says, he quoted about saying this: "It's a romantic love ballad, not about anyone in particular, but about a feeling." Sounds like a grumpy man speaking to me. A nice song, though, nonetheless. Anything to add on this one?
Yeah, one of the things would be Sweet Thing is the only song on the album to look forward instead of backward. In the words of the AllMusic reviewer, over the endlessly descending circular progression, Morrison sings positive lyrics about nature and a romantic partner seemingly beginning in the middle of a thought, and I will stroll the merry way. Paul Denoyer noted that Sweet Thing puts the singer in a hazy pastoral paradise where he wanders in gardens wet with rain, or counts the stars in his lover's eyes and vows to never grow so old again, or read between the lines. He pleads with his mind to keep quiet so his heart can hear itself think. He yearns to obliterate experience and rediscover innocence. It has been a more popular cover song than any of the others on the album, and it is the only Astral Week song that has been included in any of Morrison's compilation albums.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
So here we go, Sweet Thing.
Then I went to the merry way and jumped the hedges first. water for the quench my thirst. And I show out the prairie boats and I'll get high on the blue ocean against tomorrow's sky. And I will never grow so old again. And I will walk and talk in gardens all winter rain. Oh, oh, sweet thing, sweet thing. Yeah. Sweet thing. I shall drive my chariot down your streets and cry.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I love the way that it soothes. It's like a kind of like a 1960s hug. It's just great. But the whole album has done that for me. And, you know, I genuinely am a convert, because when you said, let's do Astral Weeks, I kid you not, Helen, I was like, oh, God, no, anything but this. But it has been an absolute revelation.
I'm glad. Because it's appealing to the next generations as well. I mean, the don't know. It seems to have a resonance with my own adult children. I don't know whether that's because when you mentioned about Van Morrison's father having the biggest record collection in Belfast, at least, but that what we play as is taken up by a new generation.
Yeah,
some of it is left behind. I don't know, but
I thought it was really interesting that you said about in 2001 the album was certified gold, having shipped 500,000 copies in the US.
Yeah.
Music historian Andrew Ford said the album's commercial performance, much like the musical aesthetic, is similar to classical music, neither instant nor events, whatever. Astral will sell as many copies this year as it did in 1968 and has every year in between.
Okay.
And I think that's really interesting that it has like a timeless appeal to it. Now the next song, Cypress Avenue, this is my favorite song on the album. I just absolutely fell in love with this.
Absolutely, yeah.
And a really interesting story that he grew up in Hindford Street, which was a little terraced house with an outbuilding, and he used to walk up and down Cypress Avenue as part of his walks to get inspiration and whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought what was really interesting was that on his 70th birthday, he performed 2 shows on Cypress Avenue, which I think is really lovely. But oddly, he didn't play this song at either performance.
Here you go.
So
that's Van the man.
and I thought this kind of was, and this is again a really interesting thing. I think that you can see the influences of some of these songs in lots of songs that have come after, and I think this song had a very, very big influence on Ralph McTell. The sound of this is really very much like the sort of sound that he's after. Interestingly, and I said this to Helen when we spoke earlier in the week. In a previous job, one of the people that was a manager of mine was an absolutely hideous human being, and a really spiteful man. And one of the things that I did like about Van Morrison, even in those days, was that this man's wife ran off with Van Morrison. So he couldn't have been all bad. I should have spotted it then. That he had my best interests at heart. So this is the last track on side one. Side one, which is called "In the Beginning."
That's right. Yeah.
Which I should love, and this is the last track on the side, and the side 2 is called "Afterwards." which again, just a really interesting way to dress sides 1 and 2 of an album. So have you got any gems about this track?
Just other than that, the song is told from the point of view of an outsider watching from inside an automobile and getting tongue-tied as the refined schoolgirl he fantasizes about appears, and he imagines her a fine lady with rainbow ribbons in her hair and a carriage drawn by 6 white horses and returning from a fair. Van Morrison described Cypress Avenue as a street in Belfast, as you said correctly, a place where there was a lot of wealth. It wasn't far from where I was brought up, and it was a very different scene. To me, it was a very mystical place. It was a whole avenue lined with trees, and I found it a place where I could think.
Yeah.
And think, yeah, she's definitely the, 6 minutes and 50 seconds. That's one of the things about these. I mean, if you think
You
you've
get
gone
your
through
money's
3
worth
tracks.
to these tracks, don't you?
Yeah. So, but I think the afterwards, they get a bit shorter until you get to the last one. But anyway.
So here we
It's
go.
great.
Cypress Avenue.
Yeah.
And I'm caught one more time up on Cypress Avenue. Caught one more time up on Cypress Avenue. And I'm conquered in a car seat. Nothing that I can do. I may go crazy before that mansion on the hill. I may go crazy before that mansion on the hill. But my heart keeps beating faster. Yeah, my feet can't keep still. And I'm the little girl trying to...
I could just sit and listen to it, to be frank with you. It's all just so soothing, isn't it?
Wonderful for a Friday afternoon at the end, nearing the end of a very hard, difficult week. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to the end of side 1.
Yes.
A nice way to round it out because it's quite a soothing track. But onto side 2 afterwards, the way young lovers do. This is where you're starting to hear the real jazz going on, isn't it?
correct, yeah.
I love the jazzy vibe of this. I particularly like the trumpet solo, like a minute and a half in, the trumpet solo starts, and you could be listening to a Charles Mingus album or a Miles Davis album, and I love the way that he's blending the kind of the folk and the rock and the jazz together, because actually jazz normally doesn't get blended into kind of more mainstream music, does it?
No, not that I've seen anyway.
So Brian Hinton, music journalist, believed that the song is about growing up, an adolescent first kiss, and still conveys the same sweet mystery as Astral Weeks, but more upfront. Any gems on this one? Well,
actually, a few sort of hurting words in some sense, but I think very, very useful in their own right. It is described by a chap called Clinton Halen, and this is from a site called Genius.com, as lounge jazz sound that still sticks out like spumante at a champagne buffet.
Yeah.
In his review for Rolling Stone, Greg Marcus also spoke of the song as a poor jazz-flavored cut that is uncomfortably out of place on this record. Brian Himpton describes it as there being a Sinatra strut to Van's voice, a blues knowingness with Stax brass, and a string section which swirls where previously it drifted. He describes it as about growing up and adolescent's first kiss.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So here we go.
But it's what I like, though.
Yeah.
We strolled the fields all wet with rain, and back along the lane again. There in the sunshine, in the sweet summertime, the way that young lovers do. I kissed you on the lips once more, and we said goodbye just like dawn in the nighttime. Yeah, that's the right time to feel the way that young lovers do. Then we sat down our own star and dreamed about the way that we were and the way that we wanted to be. Then we sat on our own star and dreamed of the way that I was for you and you were for me. And then we danced the night away and turned into each other and say,
We're just getting towards the trumpet solo. Wow. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic, and a great intro. I love the fact that it's a contrast to much of the other stuff that's on.
Yeah.
Great intro into the side 2 of the album. Next track, Madame George.
Oh, this is
called the other album masterpiece, along
correct.
With Cypress Avenue.
Yeah.
10 minutes long, nearly. Absolutely brilliant. Interestingly, that Cypress Avenue crops up in the lyrics of this. You know,
because it was also set in Cypress Avenue.
Yeah.
Impressionistic stream of consciousness lyrics that are seemingly unrelated. Eric Haig describes the effect of the sensory experiences of the lyrics, the instrumentation, and Morrison's impassioned vocals on the listener and the album as being like some kind of twilight state between sleeping and wakefulness, engaging the listener to project themselves into a spell of the song. Rolling Stone's album reviewer wrote, "The crowning touch is Madame George, a cryptic character study that may or may not be about an aging transvestite, but that it's certainly as heartbreaking a reverie as you will find in pop music." Morrison has denied that the song is about a transvestite, as others, including Lester Bangs, have believed. The original title of the song, I believe, is Madame Joy. And Morrison later changed the title, replacing Joy with George. An earlier recording for Bang Records with slightly altered lyrics, backing singers, and a much swifter tempo, and a bizarrely, inappropriately party atmosphere changes the tone considerably from the Astral Weeks recording. So there's one to go away and listen, see if you can find and listen to it as comparison.
And you know, I will. I am a convert now. And I thought this was a particularly innovative track. So I think one of the things that's really interesting about pivotal albums, and we saw it with Led Zeppelin when we covered that a couple of months ago, is that you can hear the seeds that have germinated years down the road, and this is the song. You can hear how this has influenced Pink Floyd, REM, just about every band that came after, in terms of some of these little lyrical lollipops that are thrown around. So here we go, Madame George.
Down Cypress Avenue, with the childlike vision sleeping into view. Click and clacking of the high heel shoe. Ford and Fitzroy, Madame Joy. Marching with the soldier boy behind. He's much older now, with hat on, drinking wine. And that smell of sweet perfume comes drifting through. The cool night air like Shalimar. And outside they're making all the stops. The kids out in the street collecting bottle tops. Going for cigarettes and matches in the shops. Happy taking Madame Joy. Oh, that's when you fall. Whoa, 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 whoa. That's when you fall. Yeah, that's when you fall. When you fall into a trance, sitting on a sofa playing games of chance, with your folded arms and history books you glance into the eyes of Madame Joy. When you think you found the bag, you get weaker and your knees begin to sag. You're caught up playing dominoes and dragons. The one and only Madame Joy.
Just absolutely fantastic. I mean, I am enjoying this album so much.
Yeah.
And I say this in most weeks. It's really interesting, actually in the show, I'm hearing things, even though I've listened to it 50 times, I'm hearing things for the first time in the show. It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Brilliant. Because with this track particularly, I think again, if I refer to Electric Literature, who come out and say that Van's voice and Davis's bass twining around one another, Davis tapping out the spine of the song so Van can sweep over it. Every moment of this song, Marcus writes, is another little contingency, every moment in which Davis and Van beckon and respond to one another as musicians. Grail Marcus is wonderful in his descriptions of Van's interactions with the musicians, their responses to each other. In his book, When the Rough God Goes Riding, he describes how Morrison was saying nothing to the musicians in terms of banter or instruction, and saying everything in the cues of his chords. and hesitations, his lunges, silences, and in those moments when he lost himself from words and floated on his own air. But that's too simple. When you listen, you hear the musicians talking to each other. More than that, you hear them hearing each other, which I thought was, and that, yeah, just replay that.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So the penultimate song, Ballerina.
Yes.
What do you make of this?
I've kind of mixed about this one because, again, going back to Genius, they're saying that it's the oldest composition on Astral Weeks. It was Morrison composed in 1966, apparently, while still a member of them. So when I noticed there was a comment there about the album in New York, and that's correct. But anyway, he basically, when Morrison composed 1966, he was still a member of them. And at that time, at about that same time, he first met his future wife, Janet, as he later called Janet Planet. Inspired by a flash about an actress in an opera house appearing in a ballet, according to Morrison, former then guitarist Jim Armstrong recalls the band working on the song between engagements. Morrison had all these words, Armstrong says. We sort of formalized it because there was no structure to it, and then performed the song one night in Hawaii, but it was not recorded until Astral Weeks.
Right. So I've really enjoyed listening to this song, but there's one thing that I cannot get past with this song.
Okay.
And that is that in 1993, 4 non-blondes wrote and recorded a song called What's Up. So I'll give you a little burst of that before we do Van Morrison. And this is what I mean about this album being so influential, because clearly people have listened to this and they've either lifted bits wholesale from the album and either used the themes or used some of the kind of the backing melodies, or they've been heavily inspired by it. Anyway, here's What's Up, 4 non-blondes. And here's Ballerina. So it's exactly the same intro, and I couldn't get that out of my head.
Yeah, that's very good.
You know you own me.
I think so.
Lonely 22 story block. I got somebody 1930 wanted to get close to you. For instance, me, baby. All you gotta do is ring the bell. Step right up. Step right up. And step right up. Ballerina. Grab the ketchup. Fly it, Well, I may be wrong.
Wow.
So
7 minutes long, by the way, is that particular.
yeah, I mean, lots of the tracks are monster
Yeah.
tracks, aren't they?
My sweet Lord, surely not, said George Harris.
Which brings us on to the last track, sadly, because actually often with albums, you know, you get to the end and you go, oh, that's fine, that's tied it off nicely. But here, it's like 8 tracks feels like, even though some of them are quite long, it does feel like being a little bit shortchanged, doesn't it? You'd like a bit more, another couple of tracks.
You take that up with Van the Man, okay?
Yeah, no, I've already tried. He won't talk to me about it because, as we know, he's always grumpy. A great way to round out the album. The only song on the album not to have string overdubs, apparently, and according to John Payne, Morrison had not played it live before. So there we go. In this tells of watching a young girl die.
Yeah.
Is it drug overdose or something?
Yeah, I think so. It just mentions about TB sheets, which is, again, an album that he brought out as well. But yeah, he seemed, there's a yearning, I think, in all of the songs of somehow, here is this 22, 23-year-old singer-songwriter, and in his music, it's like this elder person.
He's 23 when he wrote.
Correct. Yes.
It's quite something for someone of that age, that, you know, young age to deliver something like this, isn't it?
He's often talked about the labels or titles that have come up also is inarticulate speech of the heart, that he could wake up. He talks about waking up from a dream and just trying to capture. So it's almost like there's something else talking through him. And he's often referenced that over the years. But inarticulate speech of the heart, I think, is captures for me so much of what I hear in my very, very limited world compared to. But he has one other album, which I have to say, if I were to say that there was one that was particularly special for me, and it's Poetic Champions Compose. That comes later, but it's a very little known album. I'm not sure. Anyway, for me, I got it first on a cassette.
and it's worth a listen, is it?
I believe so, yes, because I think it does get to the heart of Van the Man. And is he grumpy or just shy?
Who will ever know? So here we go.
Here we go.
Slim Slow Slider, the last track on the album.
Slim Slow Slider, horsey ride, as white as snow. Slim Slow Slider, horsey ride, as white as snow. Tell it everywhere you go. Saw you walking down by Ladbroke Grove this morning. Saw you walking down by Ladbroke Grove this morning. catching pebbles from some sandy beach. You're out of reach. Saw you early this morning with your brand new boy and your Cadillac. Saw you early this morning with your brand new boy and your Cadillac. You're gone for something, and I know you won't be back. I know you're dying, baby, and I know you know it too. I know you're dying, and I know you know it too. Every time I see you, I just don't know what to do.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I'd just make a quote from what's regarded as a great rock critic, Lester Bangs. He says, Van Morrison was 22 or 23 years old when he made this record. There are lifetimes behind it. What Astral Weeks deals in are not facts but truths. Astral Weeks, insofar as it can be pinned down, is a record about people stunned by life, completely overwhelmed, stalled in their skins, their ages and selves paralyzed by the enormity of what one moment of vision they can comprehend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Heavy
Great.
jelly here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Completely agree, Andrew. It was just lovely, just like a big hug. So what can I say?
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, for the education. You know, Van Morrison has moved from zero to hero in one bound. You know, I just absolutely love the album, and this will be a favourite of mine going forward. So thank you so much. Thank you for your
Thank you.
and your passion. And hopefully you'll come back and do another album. Next week, it's Andrew Slessor is joining me again, and we're going to be doing Sting, 10 Summoner's Tales, which is a great album, I think. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? Because it's always so. All of you in the audience, if you would like to be a guest on the show, as Helen was today, I would love to have you, because bring your best albums and your best arguments. And until then, see you all next week. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Helen, most of all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody in the audience.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, absolutely right. It was a really good call, and thank you for the education. So until next week.